Hi everyone, it's Talia from Zart, and today we're going to be making Kintsugi collages. So here's an example of what we'll be making today. So we've got our Kintsugi inspired vases, teapots, teacups. But first of all, what is Kintsugi? So Kintsugi literally translates into joining with gold in Japanese. So the idea behind this is embracing your imperfections. Now, generally this would be done with ceramics, porcelain, using broken pieces of ceramics and then putting them back together with a gold outline of where the cracks were. So because we're not working with pottery or porcelain or anything like that, we're working with collages because it's a really interesting idea that is great to talk to students about, especially within artworks. So I wanted to create a lesson where you can still look at the ideas of Kintsugi but translate it into something that's probably a bit more accessible for younger students, especially primary students, and something that they'll be able to achieve. So we've turned our pottery into a collage instead. So we're working with torn paper and either gold leaf or a gold marker to create those golden outlines. So there's a few different ways that you can go about this lesson. So I'll give you some different options on how you can work with this kind of project. So for our collage paper, we'll start off with the kinds of things that you can use for that. So for some of these collages, I've used things like rice paper. So this is a patterned rice paper that I've torn up and collaged. This one is a patterned paper, and this one is paper that I've hand drawn over the top of to decorate. So I'm going to show you how I've made this paper. I have used just a piece of cover paper. So if we're looking at history and Asian ceramics, cobalt became really popular to use in Asian ceramics because it became more available. So that's something you can talk to with your students. That's the reason I'm going to be using blue and why I've used blue for a lot of these examples, but you can use any color that you like. But if you want to link to history and Asian culture, then that's something you can talk about in your lesson. So for my handmade paper, I'm going to explore some of the shapes and patterns within some of that Asian pottery, and I'm going to use a white marker on my cover paper to create some designs. Okay, so I think that'll just about do it because we are working at a smaller scale. You could work at a larger scale, so you could fill your whole page with pattern. You could even do an A3 page. You can explore some different designs in Asian ceramics if you want to and add that into your piece. Completely up to you, but because I'm working at a small scale for this, I don't need to cover my whole page. So the next part of the process will be to tear our papers, but I'll just show you some papers that you can use that look really nice for a project. So this piece here was just some gel plate printed papers. So just using the same paper and over again to create the prints. So even if you've got some scrap paper in your class or even gel plate printed paper that your students aren't using anymore, this actually works really well for this project. And over here is our next part of the process, which is some leaf prints done on a gel plate and then torn apart and then put back together, which is now the step in the process that we'll be working on. So for this, we will be needing a piece of cartridge paper. Now you don't need anything too thick, just a standard 130 GSM is fine, or even thinner, just because we need a surface to layer our torn paper onto. We'll also be using, for this part of the process, a glue stick. You could also use your Zart Podge, but it is just the adhesive layer underneath. So the Zart Podge is great for later on when we're using our gold leaf or sealing our collage torn pieces together. So you can just use a glue stick if you want to save your Zart Podge for later on. So we'll get our glue stick ready. We've got our paper, and this is the fun part where we get to tear our artwork. So you do want to be careful about where you're tearing, and you want to make sure that things are lining up. If you want to be a little bit more random about it and not have your patterns connecting in the same way, then you can definitely do that. On some of these, my patterns aren't really connecting. I did more of a random collage effect here, so you can see part of these areas are not lining up with other areas. But for this artwork, I've tried to make sure that the pieces are lined up in the design. Depending on what you want to do with your students, you can randomly tear up your pieces and then put them together in whichever way you feel. feel, or you can try and line up your design, which I am doing here. So I'm starting at that top corner, applying my glue in that top corner, and then trying to stick it down so everything will be somewhat in alignment with where the tears are. So you can be very careful about where you're tearing your paper, or you can just go in and rip it any which way you want to. So let's work on this next piece. Now when I'm lining up my tears, I do want to line them up, but I don't want to overlap them. I want a little bit of room in between the tears to accentuate the tear, accentuate the imperfection that we've got in that tear. And that's where our gold is going to sit. So I like to have just a little bit of room in between each layer, each piece of paper. So what I'm going to do now is continue to tear up my paper and lay it down. I like to start from the edges with my tear, or always have an edge on the tear where I can, just because those straight lines are much easier to match up than random lines, especially if you tear up all of your paper at once. It can be hard for the students to figure out which piece goes where if they are trying to line everything up. And you can also tear your pieces into even smaller pieces. So depending on what level you're working at, you might get them to do only a couple of tears, or you might get them to do really small and intricate tears, all part of the design process and choices that your students can make. So I'm going to go for not too many tears, not too many small pieces, but I will put my work back together. Okay, so I've got my tears done. I haven't done this part there. I could stick it down, but I know I'm not going to use it because I'm going to work at a smaller scale, and I'm not even going to use this paper. I'm going to use some pre-made paper, but that's beside the point. What I would do now is use my Zart Podge, which is just a clear sealer, also an adhesive, with a larger brush. This will dry completely clear, but I just want to seal down all of those tears, make sure nothing comes unstuck, and this will give my work a really nice glossy layer as well. So you can paint that over the top. Doesn't take too long to dry actually, but it's nicer to work on a piece of paper that's already prepared and isn't going to stick to anything by accident. Also, if you're using your gold marker over the top, then you do want to make sure that your glue is completely dry. So in one lesson, you can tear your papers and seal them down, just making sure nothing comes unstuck. So that will dry completely clear. We'll leave that to the side, and we'll use a paper that I prepared earlier. So this is my gel plate leaf, which I will use. I've also done the same thing with some really nice textured paper, which I think would look really good as a small kintsugi piece because of that texture is really nice. But I want to use these leaves because I think they're pretty, and they're also blue, which goes with the theme. So what we do here is we introduce our gold leaf. So here is the gold leaf. It is super delicate, and for your students, this is probably something that I would recommend doing with middle primary at the earliest. More senior primary, don't sneeze, don't have fans, don't have a window open, because gold leaf is super fine and it will blow away and get everywhere. So you can see I've used some smaller pieces here, and that is going to stick to my hands because I've got a little bit of Mod Podge on them. Oh my gosh, so you can see how fine that is. It is difficult to work with, not going to lie, so good for your older students to have a try working with it if you want to use a gold leaf. I will show you the alternative of a gold pen later on as well, which you can definitely use and is much easier. So unstick myself from this. Now, when you are traditionally using gold leaf, you want to lay down your gold leaf in sheets, but I'm going to show you a bit of a cheats way because I found that I can use less gold leaf this way. It doesn't give you a flat kind of appearance. It will be a little bit more crinkled like this one, but I think the way that I apply this will make it much easier for your students and will also save on wastage. So the way that I applied gold leaf for these pieces, which I think is good for schools, is find your cracks, apply your Zart Podge onto those cracks or those tears, cracks if you're working with pottery, tears if you're working with paper, and you can apply it as thick as you need to. This stuff, like I said, will dry pretty quickly if you let it. Now just on a spare piece of paper, thank you spare piece of paper. What I like to do is pick up a little bit of that gold leaf and press it into those cracks and just dab it on with the brush. Now the reason I like this is because normally when you're using gold leaf, what you would do, and I'm going to waste this gold leaf because I can, is you would let your glue dry a little bit until it's a little bit more stickier, but you would apply your gold leaf down and just gently pressing it, and then you would use another brush, so a very fine soft brush, and you would brush away that gold leaf. Now, when I have seen students do this, yep, they'll brush it all away, and they might brush too much, and then they will get rid of all that gold leaf in the crack and it will come away, and then they'll have to do it again. So I find that just applying the gold leaf in little sections and pressing it into the right place instead of laying a whole sheet over the top works a bit better. It might not get a artist quality result, but it will get your gold on the areas that you want the gold, and it will still be shiny and it will still be nice. So that's the way I would do it with students, and that's the way I'm going to do it on this sheet of paper. So I'm going to continue to use these little bits of gold leaf, place them down, and make sure that my tears are all full of that gold, and move it around with my brush. So I'm going to continue that, and then we can have a look and see what it all looks like at the end. Okay, so I've filled in some of those cracks with gold leaf. You can continue on and fill in the rest of those tears, but I want to show you the difference between the gold marker and the gold leaf. So again, depending on what level students you're working with and the result you want, if you are working with higher level secondary students, then you might do the gold leaf in the way where you place the whole sheet of leaf down on the glued torn area and then brush it away with the brush. Very fine motor skills needed there. If you're working with maybe senior primary or lower secondary, then you might want to use this technique where you're filling in those gaps with little torn pieces of the gold leaf and just filling it in bit by bit. Less fine motor skills needed there, a bit easier to work with and less gold leaf required. If you're working with younger students, so your juniors, your middle primaries, then you might want to use something like a gold marker. So this is just a paint pen and simply, easily going over those cracked areas and filling it with gold. So you can see there is a difference between the gold leaf and the gold marker. The gold marker is never going to look exactly like gold leaf, but you get a nice gold outline. It's still quite vibrant, not as vibrant compared to the gold leaf, but at least you still get the idea behind the artwork, and it is still nice and shiny. Of course, you could use gold paint as well. There are a variety of different gold paints that you could paint into these tears, but all up to you and what you have available. There are lots of options there, but just so you can see the difference. So filling in those cracks, you can use your Zart Podge again to go over the top of that if you do want to seal it. This gold leaf here is already sealed with the Zart Podge. So we can put our Zart Podge away. I'm going to go to the next step of the process. Because that is still wet, I'm going to just grab my pre-made pieces of papers here and put the gold leaf away because that will fly around everywhere. So just enclose that and make sure that all your little bits and pieces don't go flying around, because they definitely will. So I've got my rice paper here, I've got my patterned paper here that I can work on. So for my first design, I'm going to create a cute little vase design, and this one is a really easy one to do with your younger students. We're looking at symmetry here, so you can just gently fold your paper in half, and as you can see, I'm working on small scale, so I haven't used too much gold leaf, I haven't used too much paper. grab your pencil and then just draw half the design of your vase over that fold. So it can be a little bit tricky here, drawing on the fold without completely folding your paper because I don't want that crease in my work. You can have a look at different designs of vases. Again, linking back to Asian culture, history, you can look up some of those designs. And now simply with your scissors, cutting with your paper folded, going around that outline, moving your paper instead of moving the scissors, trim that off, open wide, and then you have a cute little Kintsugi inspired vase design. So that's very easy. You can go back around if you need to clean up any of your cuts, any of your lines, but that is your vase shape done. That simple. If you wanted to extend it maybe with your older year levels, then you can do designs like the teapot, the teacup, and I've used a black marker just to outline the whole piece and then create just some detail on the inside as well. But that's all a really easy one to do. Draw it on the opposite side of your paper and then cut it out and then outline it in your black. But there's lots of different options here for how you can create your Kintsugi inspired collage, looking at different shapes, different patterns in Asian art, using different materials, whether you're going with the gold leaf, the gold marker, or even gold paint if you have that available. But great activity that can be adapted to suit whatever level your students are at. But otherwise, thank you for watching, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again next time.